And it's an interesting book with two very interesting professors from the UK and from the US, who today are going to talk about the book they both edited. The book is called Legacies of Trade and Empire, Breaking Silences, and it's been edited by Professor Shihan D. Silva, Jaya Surya, and Professor Beheroze Shroff. Uh, Professor Beheroze is a lecturer in the University of California, Irvine, and Professor Shihan is a senior research fellow at the Institute of Commonwealth Studies and a senior associate at the Lucy Cavendish College of the University of Cambridge. So, as we get going, professors, uh, maybe the best point to start is at the shallow end of the pool, where you tell us something about the book and what it contains.
Um, Thank you, Fred. Good afternoon, everybody, because in London it's afternoon evening time. Can we have the front cover and the back cover of the
Yeah,
book?
professors, you all carry on. I'm struggling a little bit with the screen share, but I will eventually do that, and also the table of contents. But in the meanwhile, if you could just tell us what's in it, and I'll get that going. So
All right, no problem. So the book is called Legacies of Trade and Empire: Breaking Silences, and it was published by Cambridge Scholars Publishing this year. So the book follows a conference that I convened at my home institute, the Institute of Commonwealth Studies in the University of London, 2 years ago. There are 7 chapters in the book which follow an introduction by myself, and a cross section of empire is viewed through multiple lenses in this book. The chapters concern intercultural interactions and the afterlives following the European empires that began in the early modern period. So the legacies left behind by the Portuguese, the French, the Dutch, and the British empires are grouped within 3 categories. The first category is called creolization and creolite. And here we hope to project a chorale, picture of a chorale from Professor Ute Fendler's opening chapter. And she is at the University of Bayreuth in Germany. She writes about living together in contact zones, and she searches through the works of 2 scholars, the Martinican philosopher Edouard Glissant and the Mauritian poet and writer Karl Torabulli. Professor Fendler draws on Glissant's well-known concepts of relation and tout monde, which means all world, for those who don't know French. She concludes, yes, and then her chapter is followed by a chapter from Canada in Montreal by Dr. Marie-Christine Perrant, who writes on Creole music in the southwestern Indian Ocean islands. The case of the Sega Mutia in the Seychelles. Sega Mutia is a popular music genre, and Dr. Perrant analyzes the development of the Sega Mutia through a band called Fek Arrive. So creolization is a continuum, and she illustrates this through the song called Sa Nu Muge, which Fred would like to play to you if he can. It's on YouTube.
Fred, you're muted.
We can't hear you. We can't hear you.
yeah, we'll do it at the end. We'll do it at the end.
Okay, so Fred will play the music at the end. So Beheroze, over to you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Fred, for organizing this book talk. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm in California right now. It's a bright, sunny day in the morning. Okay, so the next section in our book is called Creativity in Diaspora, with 3 chapters. Chapter 3 is by Dr. Frederick Noronha himself, the host of our book talk today. It's called Not by the Cross Alone, Understanding the Role of Asia's First Printing Press. Dr. Frederick Noronha writes, and I wish to quote him here: "The role of Goa's early printing press remains inadequately understood. Its role went far beyond the religious and could be seen as a fulcrum point of the early knowledge exchange between Asia and Europe. Dr. Noronha points out that the press promoted other knowledges, linguistic grammars and texts in several Asian languages that went beyond the geographies of Asia, and of course, botanical knowledge, the origins of botanical knowledge in Goa. The next chapter, continuing in India, is my own chapter by Beheroze Shroff, Afterlives of Siddhis in Karnataka, Association of Agency by Indians of African descent who are called Siddhis. I write from my interviews that I conducted with Siddhis, sharing their voices and giving them visibility through the photographs of their habitat and their projects. I also deal with post-COVID realities that set in, and the Siddhis are somewhat in a struggle with that situation. My main focus is on a Siddhi couple, Juliana and Juje Siddhi, who continue to innovate and devise ways of helping their community. I go on to the next chapter, chapter 5, by Dr. Tom Hugervost from the Royal Netherlands Institute of Southeast Asian and Caribbean Studies. Dr. Hugervost shows how trade and empire building gave rise to diasporas that are agents of cultural diffusion. He discusses the global culturescapes by identifying connections through linguistics and history in his chapter, Gastronomy Under Duress, Connected Indonesian Food Practices in Suriname, Sri Lanka, and South Africa. I assure you that this chapter is going to make you feel hungry. The final theme, Epistemes of Empire, concerns the British Empire, which governed a quarter of the world's population. In chapter 6, the colonial continuum in language and literature is epitomized through Leonard Woolf's masterful novel, The Village in the Jungle. And this chapter by Professor Shihan de Silva Jayasuriya from Institute of Commonwealth Studies, University of London, and Lucy Cavendish College, University of Cambridge, is a study of Leonard Woolf's incredible mastery of the Sinhala language, which becomes a tool with which Leonard Woolf enters the minds of the colonized subjects and has incredible empathy with their powerlessness and struggles. De Silva Jayasuriya argues that the novel is a call for decolonization and illustrates that those like Leonard Woolf, who are trapped within the imperial machinery, were not necessarily in favor of empire. The final chapter by Dr. Xin Li, University of Bayreuth, Germany, concerns the novel by Tobago-born Canadian writer Marlene Nourbiz Philippe, whose resistance to colonialism manifests through a desire to deconstruct the binary relationship between colonizer and colonized. In the chapter Aesthetics of Silence, Marlene Nourbiz Phillips' Looking for Livingstone, An Odyssey of Silence, is examined by Dr. Lee, who deconstructs, splits open an imaginary reconstruction by Marlene Nurbis Philip of the famous English traveler and physician Dr. Livingstone by a woman narrator of African descent. Dr. Lee sees this woman as a subaltern speaking subject, and the subaltern subject was brought into postcolonial theory by Dr. Gayatri Chakravarti Spivak in 1994 by her groundbreaking essay, Can the Subaltern Speak? So that concludes all of the chapters in the book. Thank you.
That's very nicely put. Thanks to both. Uh, if we could shift a bit now that you've told us what's in the book, what does this book add to the debate, professors, and what gap does it fill, in your opinion?
I can take that question.
Fine.
Yeah, thank you. The book adds to the growing scholarship in legacies of trading in commodities that included human cargo. There is also a renewed interest, as our book shows, in legacies of empire in post colonial studies, as independent nations today in Africa and Asia trade with the former imperial powers and interact with them as trading partners. Also, the book fills a gap by scholars who examine the intervention of colonizers like Leonard Woolf and the Goan scholars, as illustrated by Dr. Norona, colonizers whose work in the diaspora, in the communities where they were colonizers, adds an entirely new dimension to legacies of trade and empire. The colonizers break the silence in these chapters by Shihan de Silva Jayasuriya and Fred Norona. So both of your works bring to light the nuanced, complex meanings of legacies of colonialism. Also, in this volume, we hear the voices of descendants of the colonized who suffer double oppression through colonialism and the slave trade. The chapters bring out afterlives of diasporas resulting from the slave trade and indentured labor. The diasporic subjects reinvent identities in these chapters and claim new forms of cultural citizenship by assertions of agency through literature, music, food innovations, and sustainable forms of livelihood. So, thank you.
Interesting. I was struggling with the title because it can mean many different things. So, just a request to elaborate. What's the significance of the title of the book? Legacies of Trade and Empire, Breaking Silences, plural. Yeah.
Let me answer that. Our book actually presents voices of contemporary diasporic communities who have reshaped the legacies according to their socio-political needs. So in that sense, we are breaking the silence from people within.
To shift gears a little, what went into the selection of topics as well as the authors? Because one would guess this is a vast canvas that you're dealing with, and it's scattered, it's all over the place, and of course it's your field of work. But what led to the choice of topics in that sense and authors?
Yes, it was a Zoom conference. So Zoom conferences can be very tiring if they're too long. So we had to limit it to a few scholars, and the authors were chosen for their scholarship. And I know the scholarship of each of these authors. So, and they are also spread in a wide geographical area across the various oceans, and they are from various ethnicities. And the concepts that they deal with, like creolization, afterlives, decolonization, slavery, indenture, foodways, and resistance. They're all important when we address legacies of trade and empire. Some authors, like you, Fred, and Beheroze, and myself, we are contributing our experience, while others, like Professor Uta Fendler, are conceptualizing or combining, like in the case of Dr. Marie Perrent, who did fieldwork in the Seychelles. She's combining both her experience with the concepts. So the pool of scholars are therefore diverse in terms of scholarship and also ethnicity. And I thought that would provide a balanced book. Of course, this is only a prelude. We want more books of this nature to be published.
Yeah, of course. I know how much you all struggled in making it into a cogent whole in that sense, because putting it together is not an easy job, especially when you're spanning so many centuries and so many continents. And it's an interesting picture nonetheless. What do you feel, if we keep that in mind? What do you feel are the other issues from maybe this vast and understudied region that could be taken up for further research? Any suggestions?
Um, I could attempt to answer that. Although this book contributes to the Indian Ocean world studies, which is a growing field today, it's a growing discipline, with writings from the global south and culture specific lived realities. Actually, Shihan and I both hope that more scholars will continue to write dispassionately on the colonial encounters. We do need more writing on how colonizers intervened in the lives of the colonized subjects. And then, Fred, if I may ask you a question about your own work in publishing, your own printing press, which you call 1556. And what is the driving force behind your own research on
Fine.
Goa and the Portuguese?
Without taking too much time, because I hate answering questions, I like asking them. Actually, it's a publishing house, a tiny kind of a shell of a publishing house. No, we don't have any printing with us. It tries to answer this confusion I had in my head when I realized that Goa was the first place in Asia to have a Gutenberg style printing press, and in that was in the mid 16th century. And today, till very recently, we were struggling to have enough books to reflect our diversity and our local experience, much like the rest of India, South Asia. The big cities are booming in terms of publishing, but the smaller places, their diversity doesn't get expressed. So that was the reason why I got started and named it, because I was so surprised when on a scholarship I reached Mainz and went to the Gutenberg Museum and found Goa listed as the first place in Asia which had its own press. So that was why I kind of tongue in cheek called it Goa 1556, because it was a colonial press, of course, and it wasn't meant to spread democracy and those kind of things. But the law of unintended consequences, if we want to call it that, kicked into place, and it actually played out that way. And as far as my thesis, it was after I finished almost a full career in journalism, and I had the chance to come back to the university. So I just took a subject which I was passionately in love with then and still am, and it's publishing in 20th century Goa. So the English department of Goa University, we don't have media studies there, was kind enough to harbor me under their wing. And my guide was a great person, a great friend of mine, and who also became my guide and things like that. So I enjoyed all the time that I spent there. That's it.
Thank you. That's very insightful.
And yeah, to shift gears, I forgot that it was my turn. Anything else related which you feel is important to this book, understanding it, the process, or the the incomplete work? Of course, there's always so much more to be done. But anything you'd like to add, either or both, fine.
We can let me try and answer that. I think it's about time to break the silence. So therefore, this book is in that way maybe a prelude to other books that will follow. It moves away from the Eurocentric scholarship and represents works written from within the geographies that they represent, and that adds a touch of empathy, which I feel is very important. So the book is written also in very lucid language and it's accessible to scholars and also lay people. So anyone who wishes to buy a copy can have a look at the Cambridge Scholars Publishing website. And at the moment, the book is quite pricey in hardback. It's £65. But we have put in an application and they tell us that it will be available in paperback and usually it's half price. So that will be available more globally to students and people in the global south, mostly whose budgets are very limited.
Yeah.
So if you have no more questions, I'd like to thank you, Fred, very much for organizing this first discussion on our book. And we hope that the book will be known to a wider audience now after your media promotion today. Thank you.
That's the least I could do. I think it deserves much more because it's very rare that we have books, speaking almost with a southern perspective. Although editorially it's coordinated from the north, but there's a whole lot of southern perspectives here, and I think it's very important, very interesting that more of these things happen. Thank you all again. Apologies for a few glitches that the screen shares didn't work as we planned, sharing the screen and things like that. But we will definitely try to insert some of the images at least at the end of the video, as and when it goes out, which should be soon. Thank you so much. Any last words, Professor Beheroze?
Yeah, well, I would like to thank you too, Fred, for organizing our very first book talk. And this has already been such an important way to talk about the book. So, all the chapters which Shihan enumerated and I enumerated are such important work. And we need to recognize that this scholarship is going to open and deal and give a conversation with the Atlantic Ocean world, slavery also.
We
So that,
probably, sorry,
yes,
we probably need to follow it up with a Zoom discussion where the authors are involved, and many others can be involved, because the focus here was on going live. So there are certain restrictions on the numbers and the screen shares and all. That would be much more fun, where maybe we can involve all the authors and even others who are interested in the subject possibly, and online allows us to do it so easily.
yes, yes, thank you.
Yes,
Are there
so
any questions from the,
uh,
sorry, Shihan?
Actually, I should have said this earlier. There is a possibility of anyone wanting to type in the questions. If you type it in your chat box, then it will show up here. Or if anyone would like to join the discussion, probably I don't know, that might be a bit chaotic. If you can click on this link, but yeah, but maybe it's, if you just type it in your chat box, we would get your query here. The link, I don't know, it's moving very fast, so you might probably not get it, but
There is a thank you from my namesake, Beheroze Shroff from
oh,
Bombay.
I
oh,
see.
she's Beheroze as opposed to Beheroze. Yes.
Yeah, right. That's a note of thank you. I
Okay.
appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, maybe we could talk a little bit about how we were in different geographies, Shihan and I, and we actually co-edited the book. I was in India, Shihan was in the UK, you were in Goa. Different scholars were writing. Murray Parent from Canada,
Yeah,
Ute from Germany, Shinli from China,
right.
and we went back and forth, back and forth. And Shihan, maybe you would like to add to that too.
Yes, I remember approving the script just before I was about to get onto a plane to go to fly to Sri Lanka. Beheroze remembers that, and it suddenly came out in a week or so. I was so amazed when the book came out in April. So it's been a few months now since the book came, and they've already sold, a lot of hardback copies to the libraries and so on. So we just thought that this would be an opportunity to read a wider, genuinely interested audience. And having the three of us together, I thought would have some cohesion as South Asia, although we are writing about disparate things. I mean, Leonard Woolf is a law unto himself, if you think about it. And Fred is also, writing about a
No.
balanced view about not by the cross alone, because people think the Portuguese were proselytizing all the time. So, and Beheroze, of course, writes about her usual topics about the Siddhis, but she writes more about Gujarat. But in this book, she writes about Karnataka, and particularly bringing the voices of an amazing couple, Juliana and Juje Siddhi, how they moved to Mumbai, but how they are not abandoning their village life, but throwing back to their community. I think it's very admirable of them.
While you all are here, Doctor, of course, everyone knows that Professor Shihan is from Sri Lanka and Professor Beheroze is originally from Bombay, Mumbai. And, I'm taking this opportunity to ask you all to talk about your very interesting work, maybe for a little while at least, short while. So if each of you could in turn tell us about your work both on Sri Lanka and Siddhis and Bombay. I don't know Dr. Shroff so well, but Professor Jaya Surya's, I always follow her because it always reminds me, of the kind of connect that Goa has with Sri Lanka and things like that. So maybe a little.
So Beheroze, if you take it first.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Yeah, my work has been very much on Siddhis of Gujarat and their worship of the saint Baba Gaur and the saints Baba Gaur Mai Mishra and Baba Abbas, and how enslaved people reinvented their identities by anchoring themselves in a history in India that is connected to Baba Gaur coming as a military soldier to India and Mai Mishra arriving with him to help him out to remove the forces of evil in Gujarat. Um, African descended communities have incredible ways of reinventing identities and creating belonging in the country to which they have been brought as enslaved people. Now I've started to look at Karnataka, mostly because of Juliana and Juje Siddhi, who live in Bombay and who are working with their communities with creating different projects, and especially in order to create some kind of um, resource for the communities living there. They have moved to Bombay and improved their lives, and they do want to bring those resources back to their community. So now my interest is in Karnataka, and I'm also a documentary filmmaker. So I'm hoping that I can continue to do some film work with Juliana and Juje. So thank you for this opportunity, Fred.
If I could just interrupt once, Dr. Shihan, while Professor Beheroze is talking about that, Professor, could you tell us about the state of research on Siddhis in India? Because I remember till the 90s or 80s or even 90s probably there was total confusion about who these people were. The media used to treat them as spectacle, and Indian government decided that because they are black they'll be good in sports, so train them in cricket and all that. But today, where is academic research on it reached in that sense, if you don't mind me asking this small question?
It's a big question because in the 1930s, Banaji had written a book on Bombay Africans, but since then there were others who've written, but sporadically, there were lots of intervals. So yes, only from year 2000 with a book which I co-edited with Richard Pankhurst, the Ethiopianist, which is the African diaspora in the Indian Ocean, which is a fundamental work for scholars researching the Indian Ocean, that we bring to attention the dispersed Africans, again through 8 chapters only. But at the time, it was difficult to find scholars to contribute to that book because scholars hadn't looked at their data in that context. So it was very difficult to find authors, and it was even more difficult to find a publisher because the word slave wasn't a good word. And finally, in New Jersey, the Africa World Press published it. And when it came to 2007, when it was the anniversary of abolition, and there was a so-called celebration, which is really a commemoration in Britain about abolition of the transatlantic slave trade. So then slavery became slave trade, and of course, slavery became more studied by scholars. So, as far as India is concerned, we keep uncovering people of African descent, but we have to decide, they have to decide themselves and self identify as people of Afro descent. Otherwise, they can pass off as the other communities that they've intermarried with or live among, like Adivasis or, say, the Islamic Muslim families in Lucknow, say. So it's ongoing research, and even in the historical documents, it's very difficult to find Africans because they were known by various names. They were not always known as Siddhis, they were known as Habshis, they were known as Kafsh, they were known as Zanjibaris, they were known as Babaru in the Maldives. So, and when you go to Japan and China, they're known by other names. So it's a big topic. But the state in India, yes, I mean there are quite a lot, but perhaps the surprise is that there are supposed to be 300,000 Afro descendants in Pakistan, so more than there are in India.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Professor Beheroze wants to add to it before Dr. Shihan tells us more about her research.
Yeah. Um, I started doing field work based on the foundational scholarship of Dr. Shihan Silva, Jayasuriya, and Richard Pankhurst, and Dr. Helena Basu, who writes from Germany. Her work was very important. And I started looking at the African descended communities in Gujarat from my own personal experience, as my family, my father, my parents were devotees of the Saint Baba Gaur and his sister Mai Mishra. So it became a personal journey for me to write about the Siddhis of Gujarat. And I wrote, I made films about them, and I discovered their musical instruments, which are sacred. So I discovered a lot more exists within the communities because they are also changing. Their lives are changing. They are modernizing. They are into rap and hip hop. The musical instruments are there as sacred instruments, but now they are doing different things with their lives. They considered themselves holy fakirs, and that was a way to earn a livelihood by going from village to village singing in the name of Baba Gaur. But now the younger generation does different things. They want to run small businesses, they want to be more resourceful in different ways. So it's a never ending subject and a discovery of how people continue to progress and their lives change. Every time I write an essay, something new has emerged in the community in Gujarat and in Karnataka. So I think other scholars, there are other scholars, Jasmine Esselin, for example, in University of North Carolina. Greensboro is writing about the Siddhis of Ahmedabad in much more detail. Sofia Pequino, who is at University of Toulouse, is writing about Siddhis of Karnataka. And so we need more scholarship. And I think that's happening in a very good way. Thank you.
And now time for Dr. Jaya Surya to talk about her subject, which opens a totally new field because it's so fascinating and so different from what we've said so far.
Yes, just continuing on what Beheroze said, Sophia Pequino and Jasmine Ezeline and Beheroze Shroff and myself, we are contributing to a volume of Journal of African Diaspora, Archaeology and Heritage, which will be published next year. So that's going to be quite an up-to-date volume, and we are spreading ourselves from the Persian Gulf to Southeast Asia to Indonesia. So we want to show the spectrum as much as possible. Fred, what is it that you find most exciting about my work? Is it the
Your
my first book?
music,
Yes,
and yeah,
yes,
particularly that, but of course the wider work also.
yes. So my first book was called Take Us to Taprobane because when I started learning Portuguese as an adult in London, I realized that I already knew these words through Sinhala. So I started then looking at other cultural influences. So we've had the Dutch and the British since the Portuguese in Sri Lanka, each for about 150 years. And the Portuguese who have written their histories in Portuguese are not so known to the local Sri Lankans. So they are kind of forgotten, their impact or their influence or their inspiration. So that's when I wrote my first book and identifying through lexical items the areas of culture contact, which is very amazing. And yes, music is the most vibrant contact, influence, impact. But of course, it has transformed itself because the Portuguese were driven out by the Dutch in 1658. It was a 20-year war between the Dutch and the Portuguese fighting for control over Sri Lanka. And so since 1658, they just left, and we don't know what types of music they were playing in 1658. So it's quite difficult historically. So I've had to look at paintings and, in the 19th century and try to deduce, how did these things happen. But again, it's quite evolved. But the chorus baila, which is the baila since independence, was by somebody called Ollington Bastian, who is of Portuguese and Dutch descent. And he kind of took from two genres, Cafrina, kind of Afro-Portuguese music, and another one called Wada Baila, debate baila, which is similar to other cantu or desafio in Brazil. So taking from those two traditions, and he was the master of those two traditions, so he took from those two and invented his own type of music, which has a chorus and a verse, which was better than the debate bailas, the Vada baila, where people used to get so excited. And he was a policeman by trade, so he didn't like people getting into fights, supporting one champion or the other. And of course, baila has swept, at least the urban Sri Lankans off their feet.
It's amazing music, and so close, it easily connects with Goa and Goans for some reason. But I know, to shift gears, I know how hard you'll work on your publishing, how seriously you'll take it. Maybe we conclude with some words of advice to young scholars in these parts of the world on why they should be published more often, why they need to put together these collections, maybe seminars, how to work through the system. Any brief tips that you could give them, we'd be grateful.
Shihan is the best person to answer that.
Well, if you've got a dissertation, PhD dissertation to publish, then there are specific publishers whom you could approach. So, like Cambridge Scholars Publishing, for example. But otherwise, it's a hard struggle. But it's might be best to go through a multi-author special volume, which has a guest editor, like I've been. So there's a guest editor, and there's the series, the editor of the journal. Because it is publishing is hard, and I know I had my first paper published in the Bulletin of School of Oriental and African Studies. It's not easy for young scholars to publish, that's for sure. But you shouldn't, if your work is good, and it's the truth is going to come out, and that's what I always believed in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's interesting to me that young scholars from the University of Delhi write to me and ask for my publications So there is interest now in Indians of African descent, the Siddhis of Gujarat and Karnataka. And this portal called ResearchGate and Academia that has some of my essays, some of my articles, uh, has those, but the authors write to me for permission to copy or use in their classes or as TAs or whatever. And I'm finding that the interest is growing again in many ways in India among young scholars. So that's a very good sign.
Yes, because Africa and Asia, relationships are becoming very important, and there aren't many hardcore material things. So now people are asking me about immaterial things, like the embodied memories that the Afro Sri Lankans who have brought that tradition. Interestingly, through the colonial period, there are no colonial writings about their music tradition called manja. So it was seems to have been done in secrecy as an in-group thing. So that makes it even more interesting. But then if you know about, Africa and how the Africans were, the Bombay Africans who went back to Kenya, how they were not allowed to drum in the Christian churches, for various reasons, thinking drums, talking drums, they were communicating. They could, in the ships, it could lead to rebellions, whatever reason, there was a suppression of their traditions. So they had to do it in hiding, or like in Candomblé in Brazil, where they did it, pretending to be Roman Catholics, but also worshipping Nigerian or, West African orishas at the same time. So kind of syncretic religion.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for all those interesting insights, professors. Apart from focusing on the book and the wide range of topics it touches on, we have extended into your own work, which was so insightful. Because after listening to you all, I realized how ill informed I was about, say, the Siddhis and things like that. There's so much happening we are not aware of. Thank you for bringing it to us, for putting it out into the audience, and giving some people a chance to listen live. We'll also carry the recorded version later. Thanks once again. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Fred.